The council station known as the Convergence Ring was one of the largest structures ever built by living hands. It orbited a dim, quiet star far from any single civilization's home system, chosen for that very reason. Neutral ground. A place where no one owned the floor they stood on. 14 species had agreed to that, and 14 species had shown up. The hall where they met was wide enough to hold a small city. The air inside was carefully mixed to be breathable for all, though no species found it perfectly comfortable. That was the point. Equality through mild inconvenience. They had gathered because of the Varek Dominion. The Varek were not a mystery. They were not misunderstood. They were not a species acting out of fear or desperation. They were an empire that had decided, some 200 years ago, that the galaxy was theirs to take. They had been slow about it at first, picking off small civilizations, worlds without strong navies, systems that no one else felt strongly enough about to defend. But in the last 30 years, they had grown bold. They had grown fast. And now they were pressing toward the core systems, where the older and stronger species had built their homes. The council had been meeting for 6 days. 6 days of speeches and arguments and proposals. 6 days of maps showing Varek fleet positions, casualty reports from fallen worlds, and projections about how long the remaining systems had before the Dominion reached them. Then came the question of military support. Every species at the table had been asked to contribute what they could. The responses had come in over the following 2 days, and most of them were impressive. The Korathi, a tall reptilian species with dark green scales and a long history of warfare, pledged 40 warships. Their ambassador, a broad-shouldered general named Vrox, made the announcement with the kind of quiet pride that came from knowing the number meant something. The Pelori, ancient and slow-moving beings who lived in pressurized water tanks and communicated through low-frequency hums translated by machines, offered 60 vessels from their deep space fleet. The Bryn Collective, a hive intelligence that operated through small insectoid drones, sent confirmation that 90 combat units were already en route. Other species pledged what they could. Patrol ships. Supply convoys. Medical vessels. Communication relays. The coalition was taking shape, and it was not a small one. Then humanity's response arrived. Point 1 ship. The council chamber did not go silent immediately. It took a moment, the way confusion always takes a moment, like the mind needs a breath before it can decide how to react. Then the silence landed, heavy and complete. Vrox was the first to speak. He did not raise his voice, but his words were sharp. He said that he had expected more from a species that claimed to be one of the galaxy's capable powers. He said that one ship was not a contribution. It was barely a gesture. A few of the other ambassadors agreed, their translators struggling to keep up with the speed of the objections. The Bryn translator, a small drone named Seth who had been assigned specifically to work with human communications due to its familiarity with their language patterns, read the transmission 3 times before accepting that it was correct. One ship. No support fleet waiting at the edge of the system. No second message indicating a staging convoy. Just one vessel, registered under Earth's naval authority, carrying a name in a language most aliens still found difficult to pronounce. The council's chairperson, a soft and precise insectoid elder named Sumel, raised one of her 6 thin arms to quiet the room. She was old enough to have sat through 2 previous galactic conflicts and wise enough to know that anger in a council chamber rarely solved anything. She requested that the human representative, a calm woman named Coordinator Grace Allen attending remotely from Earth, clarify the transmission. Grace's response came through clearly. Her voice was steady. Her expression, visible on the small display screen, showed no sign of embarrassment or apology. She said there was no error. She said the ship would be enough. She said they were welcome to observe. Vrox leaned back in his seat and looked at the ceiling of the great hall for a long moment. Then he looked at his second officer, a younger Korathi soldier named Dek, and said something in their native tongue that the translation systems chose to render simply as a strong expression of doubt. Dek, who had spent more time studying human history than most of his kind, said nothing for a moment. Then he said, quietly, that in his experience, the times when humans seemed the least prepared were often the times one should be most careful. Vrox gave him a long look. Then he turned back to the council floor, where arguments were still running hot, and said nothing more. somewhere across the dark between stars, a single ship was already moving. The long-range sensors on the convergence ring picked up the human vessel before anyone expected it. The ship had not sent a travel estimate. It had not broadcast a scheduled arrival time. It simply appeared at the edge of the system, dropping out of faster-than-light travel with the kind of quiet precision that made the sensor operators look twice at their screens to confirm what they were seeing. There was no dramatic flash of light. No visible shockwave. The ship came out of the jump clean and calm, like a stone placed gently on a table rather than thrown. The council's observation deck filled quickly as word spread through the station. Ambassadors, their staff, officers, and junior delegates crowded the long curved windows and the display screens showing the real-time sensor feed. They wanted to see it. Even the ones who were angry wanted to see. The ship did not look the way most of them had imagined. They had expected something that announced itself. Something large and bristling with visible weapons, the kind of design that communicated power through sheer physical presence. Instead, the vessel was long and angular, its hull plating the color of dark iron that had been left in a cold fire. There were no glowing weapons ports. No visible gun arrays lined along its flanks. It moved without any of the noise that military vessels usually broadcast on standard channels. No identification chatter. No position pings. Just motion, steady and unhurried, in the direction of the station. Vrox watched the feed from his private quarters rather than join the crowd on the observation deck. He did not say anything for a long time. His second officer, Deck, stood beside him and also said nothing. They watched the ship grow slowly larger on the display as it approached. On the bridge of that vessel, Captain Leon Dale stood at the center console with his hands resting loosely on the edge of the navigation rail. He was a broad man from the state of Ohio, with gray beginning to show at his temples and the kind of face that had seen enough that it no longer felt the need to react to every new thing. He wore his rank without decoration. He had never been the type to collect medals. Beside him, Commander Diane Cole reviewed the system data on her secondary display. She was from Arizona, sharp-faced and steady, the kind of officer who could run the numbers on a complex tactical problem in her head while holding a full conversation. She had served in 3 deep space conflict zones before this assignment, and she had the quality that only comes from having been in real danger and having come out the other side, a stillness, deep and genuine, that was not the same thing as calmness but was often mistaken for it. The crew numbered 311. When that detail filtered through to the council station, it produced its own wave of reaction. The Korathi fleet alone carried over 40,000 soldiers across its 40 ships. The idea that humanity had sent a vessel with a crew smaller than some of the station's administrative departments was difficult for many species to process without some mixture of confusion and offense. Leon contacted the council directly once the ship was within standard communication range. His voice was even and conversational, the tone of someone making a routine check-in rather than a dramatic entrance that he asked for a full tactical briefing on the Varric Dominion's current fleet positioning. He asked about their supply lines and how far they extended from their forward staging systems. He asked about the patrol cycles of their outer fleet, specifically, the timing gaps between rotations. He asked about the communication delay between their forward commanders and their central command. And he asked whether the Council scouts had documented any structural weaknesses in Varric Command-class ships, and if so, where that data was filed. The Council's tactical officer, a meticulous being named or from the Pelori delegation, answered each question carefully and sent through the relevant files. Afterward, or noted privately to Sumel that the human captain had asked very specific questions. Not broad questions about the enemy's general strength or strategy. Specific questions. The kind a person asks when they already have a plan and are looking to fill in the last details. Sumel, who had been running councils for longer than most of the current ambassadors had been alive, made a note of that. On the observation deck, the crowd had thinned a little as the initial curiosity settled into something more complicated. The ship was docked now at one of the outer berths, looking small against the scale of the station. A few of the younger delegates were already composing messages home, trying to explain what they had seen. Most of them were struggling to find the right words. Vrox finally turned away from his display. He looked at Deck and asked, in a flat voice, what the human ship was actually carrying. What made one vessel worth sending instead of 50. Deck said he did not know yet. But he said it with the kind of tone that meant he intended to find out. The council had arranged a formal welcome for the human crew. Leon attended briefly, shook the relevant hands and appendages, and answered a few polite questions about the journey. Then he excused himself and returned to the ship. There was work to be done. While the other fleets ran drills in the space around the convergence ring and the coalition commanders argued strategy in the Great Hall, the human ship stayed quiet at its berth. No weapons drills. No visible activity on the outer hull. From the outside, it looked like a vessel resting. Inside, it was anything but. The council had requested a diplomatic tour, partly out of courtesy and partly because several of the ambassadors had started asking pointed questions that Sumel knew would not go away on their own. She had told them the tour was arranged. What she had not told them was that she was genuinely curious herself. Lieutenant Commander Ray Okafor led the group through the ship. He was the chief engineer, a tall man from Texas with a calm manner and the habit of speaking about extremely complex systems the way a carpenter talks about wood, simply, directly, without needing to impress anyone. He walked the observers through the upper decks first. The crew quarters, the medical bay, the communications center. Standard things. The kind of spaces that exist on every military vessel regardless of species. The observers were polite. They asked reasonable questions. They were not particularly impressed. Then Ray took them below. The lower decks of the ship were where its character changed. The first thing the observers noticed was the sound, a low and steady hum that came not from machinery they could see but from systems built into the walls themselves. Ray explained that the ship's power core used a compression resonance design that most other civilizations had theorized but never successfully built at this scale. The Pelori observer, an older being named Was, asked how humans had solved the stability problem that had stopped every other attempt. Ray said they had tried it 700 times and learned something different from each failure. Was recorded that answer carefully. The weapon systems were next. Ray did not use dramatic language. He walked them through each one the way a doctor explains a treatment. Here is what it does, here is why, here is what it is designed to solve. The ship carried an adaptive targeting system that rewrote its own algorithms during combat, adjusting in real time based on how enemy hulls were built and how enemy pilots moved. It did not rely on preloaded profiles of known enemy vessels. It learned as it fought. The point defense network could track and neutralize over 1,200 incoming threats simultaneously. When Seth, the small Bryn drone who had been assigned to the tour as an observer, asked Ray to repeat that number, Ray repeated it without any change in tone. 1,200. At once, Seth did not ask a follow-up question. It simply stood very still for a moment, which in Bryn body language was the equivalent of a long, quiet exhale. The drive system was where the tour produced its loudest reaction. Ray explained that the ship could execute microjumps inside a gravity well. Short-range faster-than-light hops performed not between star systems but within them, within a single battlefield, within the space where other ships were already fighting. Most species considered this theoretically possible in the way that certain things are theoretically possible, acknowledged in equations, never attempted in practice, generally agreed to be tactically insane. The Korathi observer, a young officer named Preth who had been sent in Vrox's place, asked flat out if anyone had ever done it before. Ray said the crew had done it 412 times in training. He said the first 300 were rough. He said the last 100 or so had gone pretty well. Preth looked at him for a long moment and then wrote something down. At the end of the tour, Ray stopped outside a sealed door near the ship's core. He told the group that there was one more system on board that he was not authorized to describe in detail before it was used. He said this without apology or drama, the way someone states a policy rather than makes a declaration. The door behind him had no markings on it. Seth, who had been quiet since the point defense number, asked Ray a question. It asked why humanity would concentrate so much capability in a single vessel rather than spread it across many ships. Was that not a risk? Was that not putting too much in one place? Ray thought about the question for a moment. He looked at the small drone with the kind of expression that meant he was deciding how to say something true in a way that would actually land. He said that back home, there was a saying. You do not send 100 knives when one sword will do the job. Seth processed this and then asked a follow-up. It asked what happened if the sword broke. Ray smiled in the particular way that humans smile when they are not quite joking but not quite serious either. He said they had built her so she would not. The tour ended. The observers filed back out through the airlock and into the station. Most of them were quiet on the walk back. Preth sent a message to Vrox before he had even reached the main corridor. It was 4 words long. The message said, "Talk to me soon." The Varek Dominion's forward fleet arrived 3 days earlier than the Council's projections had predicted. The sensors caught them coming in from the far edge of the system, appearing out of faster-than-light travel in tight formation. 216 warships. They did not slow down immediately. They came in fast, which was a statement as much as a tactic, and they arranged themselves in the kind of layered formation that spoke of long years of fighting together. The Council's combined fleet numbered just under 200 vessels. On paper, the gap was not catastrophic. In practice, everyone on the command channels knew it was worse than the numbers suggested. The Varek fought as a single unit. The coalition was 14 species who had been trying to agree on a command structure for 4 days and had not fully managed it. The alert went out across the station and across every ship in the coalition. Ambassadors hurried to the command observation deck. Officers ran to their stations. The Korathi fleet powered up their weapons arrays with a sound that, even through the vacuum of space, seemed to reach the station as a vibration in the walls. The coalition commanders opened a shared tactical channel and began talking. Then arguing. Vrox wanted a frontal assault, a direct charge at the center of the Varek formation designed to break their line before they could establish a defensive posture. He argued that hesitation against the Varek was always a mistake. The Pelori commander, a slow-speaking being named Fun, said that a frontal assault against a force of that size would cost the coalition 1/3 of its ships before the first exchange was over. The Pelori advocated a wide flanking maneuver, using the system's 2 large asteroid fields to split the Varek formation. The Bryn drones were ready to act but were waiting for consensus, as was their nature, and their silence was filling the channel like an empty room. The debate had been running for 40 minutes. Leon's voice cut into the channel. He did not raise it. He did not interrupt anyone dramatically. He simply spoke when there was a half-second gap in the argument, the way an experienced person steps through a closing door. He said, "Permission to move first." The channel went quiet. Sumel, who had been listening from the Council observation deck, looked at the tactical display for a moment. She looked at the Varek fleet. She looked at the single human ship sitting at the edge of the coalition formation, running dark, almost invisible on the sensors. She granted permission. She said it calmly. She would later tell her staff that she was not certain it was the right decision. She had simply run out of confidence that the arguing was going to produce one. The human ship moved. What happened over the next hour and 40 minutes was later entered into the Council's formal record, not under the heading of battle but under the heading of event. The word choice was deliberate. Several of the officers who had been watching the tactical feed in real time later said that battle did not feel like the right word either. Battles were exchanges. What the human ship did was closer to surgery. It jumped. Short, precise, inside the gravity well, exactly as Ray had described in the tour. It appeared at a new position within the Varek formation, struck a Varek command ship at the junction between its primary communication array and its weapons distribution network, and disappeared before the nearest Varek vessels could complete a targeting lock. It appeared again 3 seconds later at a different position, hitting a logistics relay hub that served the right flank of the Varek fleet. Then again, Diane Cole ran the real-time tactical updates from her station without raising her voice once. She called out coordinates in the tone of someone reading a prepared list. She called out probability windows for each jump with the same steadiness. Twice she caught a deviation in the Varek fleet's response pattern before the ship's own systems flagged it, and she adjusted the jump sequence accordingly. Leon heard her and made the call each time without hesitation, the practiced shorthand of 2 people who had worked together long enough that most of their communication had compressed into single words and nods. The Varek fleet was large. It was experienced. Its individual commanders were capable people by any measure. But the human ship was not trying to fight it. It was pulling out its wiring. The command ships went dark one by one. The communication relays dropped. The fleet's ability to coordinate collapsed inward, sector by sector, like a building losing its supports from the inside out. Without coordination, the Varek formation fractured. Individual ships and small groups began making independent decisions, some trying to push forward, some pulling back, none of them getting the signals from Central Command that would have told them what the others were doing. The coalition forces, watching this unfold, needed almost no direction. Vrox sent his fleet in without waiting for consensus. The Pelori flanked. The Bryn drones moved into the gaps. The remaining Varek vessels, leaderless and confused, were contained. The engagement was over in under 2 hours. On the coalition command channel, there was a long silence after the last Varek ship stopped moving. Then Vrox's voice came through, uncharacteristically quiet. He asked if the human ship had taken any damage. Leon's voice came back after a moment. He said 2 hits had gotten through the outer defense layer. Hull scorch marks, no breach, no casualties. He said the ship was fine. Another silence. Then Vrox said, with the particular flatness of a man revising a long-held position, noted. The council chamber was quieter than it had been in years, not the strained quiet of people waiting for bad news. A different kind. The kind that settles over a room when something large has just ended and no one has quite agreed on how to talk about it yet. The displays still showed the tactical field. The Varek fleet's remains were scattered across a wide section of the system, their surviving vessels holding position under the watch of the coalition forces, waiting for the terms that would be sent from the council in the coming hours. The sector, for the first time in 11 years, was no longer under immediate threat. The human ship came back to the station under low power. It moved at a pace that matched the end of the day rather than the urgency of what had just happened. When it docked, the outer hull was visible on the station cameras, and 2 scorch marks showed clearly against the dark iron-colored plating. Long, pale burns from 2 direct hits that had gotten through. Those were the only signs that the ship had been in a fight at all. Leon walked off the ship and back into the station the same way he had walked on, without ceremony, with a small team, carrying nothing that made noise. He filed an after-action report with the council's administrative office before he did anything else. Diane walked with him, still reviewing something on her personal screen. They stopped at the station's small commissary and got coffee. They sat at a corner table and talked quietly about things that had nothing to do with the battle. In the council chamber, the conversations that started after the engagement were the kind that happen when people are still processing something they saw but have not yet built the right language for. The Pelori commander, Fun, said to his delegation that he had spent 80 years studying naval tactics and he was not certain what the correct term was for what they had witnessed. One of his younger officers suggested the word precision. Fun said that was part of it. He said he was not sure there was a single word. Seth, the Bryn drone, had been recording everything. It sent a full report back to the Bryn homeworld within 2 hours of the engagement ending, attached with a personal note that was unusual for a Bryn observer. The note said, the human vessel did not win the battle. It removed the battle's possibility before most of the battle could occur. Seth said it had never observed this approach before and did not have a category for it in its analytical framework. It said it was creating a new one. Vrox requested a private meeting with Leon the evening after the engagement. He made the request through formal channels, which was slightly unusual for him. He was not a formal channels kind of person by nature, but this felt like the kind of conversation that should be on record. They met in a small side room off the main corridor, just the 2 of them and a translator unit that neither of them ended up needing much. Vrox sat across the table from the human captain and looked at him steadily for a moment before speaking. He did not apologize for what he had said at the beginning of the council. He did not offer praise in the way some beings offer it, with large words and significant gestures. He was a general. He dealt in honest assessments. He asked how many ships like this one humanity actually had. Leon looked at him with the same unhurried, even expression that Diane had long since given up trying to read completely. He was quiet for a moment, not because he was deciding whether to answer, but in the way a person pauses when they want to make sure the answer lands clearly. He said, enough. Vrox held his gaze for a long time. The translator unit sat silent between them. Outside the room, the station hummed with the ordinary noise of a large place returning to its routine after something extraordinary. Then Vrox laughed. It was not a warm laugh. It was not a comfortable one. It was the particular laughter of a person who has just understood something very large and is still in the middle of deciding how to feel about it. It lasted only a few seconds. When it faded, Vrock sat back in his chair and looked at the far wall for a moment with an expression that his species reserved for the moments when the world had turned out to be shaped differently than expected. He said, more to himself than to Leon, that he had spent 30 years building one of the largest fleets in this part of the galaxy. He said that he had been proud of that. He said he still was. He said it simply meant something different now than it had this morning. Leon nodded. He said that sounded about right. They talked for a little while longer about practical things. The next steps for the coalition. The terms to be given to the remaining Varek forces. The question of what came after. Then they shook hands, or the closest equivalent the Korathi had to it, and went their separate ways. Back on Earth, in a naval operations office in the state of Virginia, a woman named Coordinator Grace Allen received a single-line confirmation message from the ship at some point in the early morning. She read it, marked the mission file as resolved, and moved on to the next item on her desk. She did not send a response. There was nothing that needed saying that had not already been said. No announcement was made on Earth. No broadcast. No ceremony. The kind of people who had built that ship and trained that crew had never been particularly interested in ceremonies. They were interested in problems and whether the problems had been solved. The galaxy had learned something that day, though it would take years for most of it to fully understand what. Humanity had not sent one ship because it could not spare more. It had not sent one ship as a gesture or a gamble. It had sent one ship because the situation had called for a specific answer, and that was the answer, and they had long since learned not to use more words than the sentence required. Somewhere out in the dark, the ship turned toward home.